Tell my audience, either camera, a little bit about yourself.
My name is Bruce Orr. I'm actually a retired local law enforcement officer. I was a homicide investigator for many years, and after I retired, everybody said go out and write a book. So I did, and that's why we're here. The first book was 6 Miles to Charleston regarding Lavinia Fisher. I was a homicide investigator, and my office was in North Charleston, and every day I'd come out my office, I'd look across the street, and there was the Old Navy Hospital. The Old Navy Hospital is actually built on the site of where the 6 Mile Inn was, where Lavinia was. So I'd come out every day, and I'm like, you know, one of these days when I retire, I'm just gonna go look into the story, because I grew up with the story. The story was in a book called Charleston Ghosts by Margaret Rhett Martin, and I grew up on that book. Talked about the 6 Mile Inn, talked about the story and the trap door, and then falling into the trap door, the victims. And then I was a little kid, I would dream about the skeletons crawling out from underneath my bed. My dad said, take that damn book away from that boy before I have to kill him. And then that always stuck with me. So I grew up. Those bones weren't so scary because I was a homicide investigator and I dealt with those things. So then I just decided to follow up on it, do the research, and here we are.
I've been reading through your book, and I've been doing research on my own. A big part of it is hindered by the mythos surrounding Lavinia's story. Can you explain the origins of the tall tales?
There was a Scotsman by the name of Peter Nielsen, and he was in the area at the time. Now you go back to like Old England, they had the Penny Dreadful novels. And then you get into the 1800s, we have what was called the dime novels. They made Billy the Kid infamous and all those bank robbers and outlaws. Well, he did pretty much the same thing for Lavinia. He was here and he witnessed the execution, and he went back and he wrote a little dime store novel and enhanced the elements of the thing. That's pretty much how it got started. And then of course through the years everybody's added their own embellishment to it.
How did you track down the Nielsen character?
It popped up during some of the research. It was just amazing how things would pop up. So I discovered that. So as you get on the trail, as you well know, things will just pop out. You'll be looking at something else, and over here you'll actually find something that catches your eye. I refer to it as falling down the rabbit hole. So that's exactly what I did for 3 years with Lavinia. Welcome to the rabbit hole, because apparently you're in it too now.
I'm going through a 40-foot long box of correspondences right now. It's
been there, done that.
What are the actual facts of the story that have survived this perversion of the truth?
Society, American society, is, well, I guess you could say world society is always eager to villainize a woman. It's so much easier to villainize a woman like Snow White. The antagonist in that is a woman. Go to The Little Mermaid and Ursula is a woman. It's always a woman, and it's so easy to put that on it, and that's not factual. And in the case of Lavinia, Lavinia is more victim than she is villainous. And my belief is that what transpired is John and Lavinia Fisher was probably the least known love story in Charleston. He was in Charleston, he got in trouble with the law, and he was given an opportunity to leave, as opposed to having his ears or his nose cropped and marked as a criminal. Probably receive a few lashings too. So he left the city. He goes to North Carolina to his uncle, Colonel George Fisher, and apparently there is some individuals in the backyard. There are the enslaved. You can surmise what you want from that, but there is a bill of sale to Dr. Joseph Glover regarding a Sally and a Lavinia Fisher. He got involved in a love affair that was not regarded as normal during those days. The uncle sold the enslaved woman to Charleston to get her away from him, and John followed her down here. They end up over at 6 Mile Inn having property. They are invaded, a free black woman owning property in Charleston. Governor Geddes is actually a ship salvager. President Monroe is looking to put a salvage yard somewhere in the South. So the governor, now all of a sudden, he starts gathering up property. Interestingly enough, we have eminent domain in federal government. The government wants to seize your property, they can. But here in South Carolina, well, we didn't like the federal government telling us what to do. We actually fought a little skirmish over it in 1861 called the Civil War. The way we did it in Charleston, if you couldn't pay your property taxes within a year, the state could confiscate your property. John and Lavinia Fisher are arrested February 18th of 1819, executed February 18th of 1820. 1 year to the date. Guess who couldn't pay their property taxes? Also, if you have no property on your property, makes it easier for the government. They burned the house to the ground when they arrested the Fishers. How convenient. Also on her grand jury was a man by the name of John Wilson, and he was the state engineer responsible for converting government seized property to government use. How convenient is that on the grand jury? So basically my opinion is it was a railroad job because she was a black female that owned property. The governor wanted it. He got President Monroe to divert his trip over here to Charleston to look at his potential site. Didn't happen. Now the governor's upset. 2 years later, he goes to Key West. He seizes Key West as his own, starts making money as a ship salvager, and it took the United States Supreme Court to fight him in court to get Key West, Florida back to the United States. I think that she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So you purport that she was completely innocent then?
I think so. If you look at it and look at the facts of the book, it kind of shows we had constitutional rights at the time. They're at a residence where they have every right to be, and then a man comes in and demands the residence and throws them out and says it's his house. Today would be called a home invasion. They come back, they take the house back, which is exactly what I would have done if somebody came into my house and squatted in it. A lynch mob comes, basically orders them all out of the house, threatens them with violence. They leave peacefully, and then they burn the house to the ground. Well, a lynch mob has no legal authority. We have laws against that in the state now. A lynching second degree, which is what that would have been. There's laws against what happened to them. You have a right, United States Constitution, to be secured in your property. So you have a right to, proper representation. You have a right to certain things during trial. They didn't receive any of that. They were just pretty much railroaded, executed. There were several members of an alleged gang that was arrested. Interestingly enough, the only ones that were executed, John and Lavinia Fisher, who owned 6 Mile, and William Hayward, who owned 5 Mile. Property owners are the only ones that got killed. Ponderous. Greed is the bottom line.
We know that after their sentencing on January 18th of 1820, they were meant to be hanged on the 4th of February, but a petition was sent to the governor granting a stay. The problem is I found 3 different ways that this petition is described. The first is outrage that a white woman should be hanged. My question there is, how would they have known if she was white or not? Because at that point in time, she hadn't obviously gone to be hanged yet. There was no public appearance of her, so that makes no sense to me. The second is that the Fishers wanted time to make... Thank you, Basil. The second is that the Fishers wanted time to make peace with God, and that doesn't make very much sense because they had spent the whole previous year working with Reverend Furman, Richard Furman, on exactly that. And the third is that there was another man's confession apparently put in the public papers at that time, but I haven't been able to find that confession. What do you think is the truth there in regards to that petition?
The first two, the white woman being hanged and them making their petition to God, I think that was kind of excuses for why. The person coming forward, I have not been able to find his admissions. Contrary to popular belief, the legend has it that they were villains and the city of Charleston was against them. The exact opposite happened. There was actually a pamphlet called the Coverley Pamphlet, and it had in it that there was a person that came forward and confessed to the crimes that they had been charged with. So I think that was the reason that they had a stay of execution for a while. So law enforcement could have time with this man to help him change his mind. Apparently that's what happened. He recanted his confession, probably after spending a little time at the old city jail. Then they executed these people.
Now I'm combing through all the public papers of the time to try to find that confession, but no luck so far.
Probably not, because I'm sure that's something that Governor Geddes didn't want publicized too much.
Oh, yeah.
When it came time to ask for a pardon, Governor Geddes left town. All these ladies in high society were after him, and he just left the city of Charleston.
There are 2 different surviving accounts of the events of February 18th, 1820 that we know of. One of them being the Coverley pamphlet, a letter by an anonymous GS, and the pamphlet by the Nathaniel Coverley Press, and that of John Blake White, an attorney and playwright. Can you explain a little bit about the significance of these?
John Blake White, he was a attorney, as you said, and he inadvertently encountered Lavinia while he was visiting another prisoner at the jail. It stuck with him so much so that, 10 years later, he wrote about it. He documented it. It tormented him. And the description in there of Lavinia, this legend has painted of her. He believes she was more victim than villainous. Going through that, he paints an extremely horrible picture of the executioner. They actually had to go out and find the executioner, lock him up, and sober him up so he could do a proper execution. Imagine all the demons he had to live with. These actual eyewitness statements paint a completely different picture of the legend, and it gives you a glimpse into the facts and how these people really were human beings and not just mythical creatures created for some dramatic effect over on the city of Charleston.
How accurate would you say witness statements generally are as former law enforcement?
It depends on the circumstances, and it depends on the person that's doing this. John Blake White was an attorney, so he's had to testify in court. He's dealt with evidence. He's dealt with statements. An attorney would be a great witness because he's used to knowing what to present to show a case. So I think his was pretty much very accurate. Now, when you get to the Coverley pamphlet that's being passed around, there's so many different other people's letters. So instead of just having one eyewitness account, what you have with the Coverley pamphlet is everybody's opinions. You've got a conglomerate of many people's views. I think John Blake White is the epitome of an eyewitness statement for what happened with Lavinia.
I think it's particularly telling that both of these accounts are accompanied by really lengthy essays on the dangers and immorality of capital punishment.
Even to the point where Nathaniel Cleary, he was the sheriff that arrested Lavinia and had them charged. When it came time for the execution, there had been an election and he got voted out. Public opinion was not very good on the sheriff. Another sheriff actually had to carry out the executions. Nathaniel Cleary becomes sheriff again later in another election. Several years later, he's had a change of heart. Because of the cruel and unusual punishments, he petitioned the Senate and Congress and wrote a letter, an essay, how there were 50 hangable offenses in South Carolina. How he was upset with the crimes not finishing the punishment. Somebody steals an apple because they're hungry and then they end up with a brand upon them for the rest of their life, a T for theft. This actually affected the very man that charged them. This woman had an effect on everybody she came into contact with. And that is not a villainous.
And I think it says a lot that in these various accounts of events, many descriptions of John, describing him as handsome, fair-skinned, light-haired, sorrowful, light eyes, knock-kneed, like very descriptive, where she is only ever described as being oddly beautiful. And that word oddly or weirdly, strangely, no further description ever. And that leads me to think, maybe they didn't want to admit her beauty because she was black.
There was one description of her that was described her as Amazonian or Termagant. Those both imply she had darker skin. She probably would have stood out from the white women of society of that time, and that was the thing that struck everybody. Everybody seems to think she was strikingly beautiful. You know, imagine you're about 27 years old, your husband is hanged in front of you, you're stripped out of your property, your whole life is completely upended, you're buried in a potter's field, you're dug up and put on display, and then you're beheaded after you're dead. No wonder she's a ghost in Charleston, allegedly, right? And nobody has better reason than Lavinia Fisher if she is indeed a ghost.
Oh, agreed there.
I would haunt.
Do you believe there's any truth to the supposed last words that Lavinia uttered?
Beatrice St. Julian Ravenel did a lot of research on this back in the 40s. She came up with the fact that she does indeed believe that happened, and that a reverend and another woman that was a witness, that she made that statement too. There is some evidence on her part that that did occur.
Because it's very hard to separate the fact from fiction. Given Lavinia's race and Reverend Richard Furman's pro-slavery stance in that he thought it was ordained by God that black people should be enslaved, how truthful do you think his account is, considering that is the basis for all of the articles that went out to papers across the nation?
I think there would be obvious bias towards it. That might be why he didn't minister to her. To the South, where slavery's high and is contentious even at that point. This is 1820. The South is defending it all the way through to taking it to a war in 1861.
In both of the essays on capital punishment, there is bountiful talk on the dangers of its use as a deterrent to the masses. Do you think this could be why they were not hanged at the jail, to make it as public as possible? Would it really be the crime of highway robbery or the crime of their relationship that bore the warning?
Let's jump back to 1692 Salem witch trials, and everybody just on spectral evidence. Spectral evidence, the only people that could see the spectral evidence were the victims. So everybody else had to trust their words, and people were going to the gallows. One individual was found innocent, a woman, I can't recall her name off the top of my head, but as soon as she was found innocent, the victims started writhing and going into fits, so the judge just reconvened because of that spectral evidence and reversed the verdict and hanged her. You fast forward, and if I'm not mistaken, it's Mather that came forward and stopped all that. He said he'd rather 14 or 15 witches go free than one innocent person be executed. And he actually stopped the witch trials with that. So I think we have kind of that kind of stance here with that too. These folks are making the bid that what if they were innocent? You got a sliver of a doubt with a person coming forward. I'm sure it wasn't presented at trial.
They were convicted for highway robbery of between $30 and $40, which today would be between $700 and $1,000. They were killed because they may have stolen less than $1,000.
People ask me, could you have been in law enforcement back then? I'm like, no, because of the laws they enforced. The Thomas Ryan Slave Mart is the last existing slave mart in the city of Charleston. And Thomas Ryan was a sheriff of the county that I worked in, enforcing the laws of that time. I could not have enforced those laws, and I would probably have been standing, no, I wouldn't say probably, I would definitely at that time been standing on the gallows alongside somebody waiting on my turn to get the noose around my neck. because I couldn't do the job then. Things change, people evolve, and hopefully society continue to evolve, because we're not perfect now, but we're trying.
A big element of the story that I haven't been able to corroborate yet. John supposedly escaped from the jail, but I can't find any sources that really explain any details regarding his escape from the jail, what he did when he was outside, what happened when he came back.
There was a newspaper article. He did escape with one of the other co-defendants. What had happened prior to that, there was a pirate, and one of the guards actually helped him escape. Law enforcement went out and found this guy and the guard, dragged them back to the jail. So this happened right prior to the escape. So John Fisher and his friend escaped the jail. They knocked the bricks out from underneath the window. They tied blankets together, created a rope. The two men climbed down, and before Lavinia did, the last person climbing down, the rope broke, and Lavinia's left behind. John, and his friend, they stay in Charleston stealing pocket watches and things of that nature. He had a plan to bribe another guard to try to get her freedom. The man was free. They were captured hiding underneath a boat. They could have flipped the boat over and went out into the Charleston harbor and rowed away, but the man stayed. And because he stayed, he was recaptured and he was executed. I don't think you have a greater love story than a person that has a relationship that's considered ill-fated and taboo during that time. He chases her to another complete state, marries her, tries to create a life with her, is arrested, stands by her the whole entire time. He escapes, could have had his freedom, but he stayed. And he stayed because he loved her. That's the parts that everybody's missing. He died because he stood by the woman that he cared about. And that's the shame of this whole story.
It's like Romeo and Juliet, but on a whole other level.
You know, you've got all these people that are painted as heroes. You know, the governor got challenged to a duel. He didn't want to get involved with a duel, so he had a second, his son. He put his son in front of the gun, and his son was shot. So this is the people you're dealing with. John and Lavinia Fisher are just trying to live out their lives in peace. They picked that area because there was a Native American population there, and the Native Americans actually did not care that it was a mixed race couple. So they're on the outskirts of normal society, and they're trying to live their lives. And then these people come from normal society and infiltrate their lives and completely destroy it.
I really did not expect the story of Lavinia to take this kind of turn. I'm really glad to have discovered your work.
Well, my company is called Lost in Legend. The tagline is, never let the facts get lost in the legend. You've got a legend, but you have to dig deeper and deeper to find the facts. And sometimes, like this story, the facts are far, far more interesting and intriguing than what the actual legend is.
What reactions have you gotten from people when you've shared this very different account of the Fisher's story?
I was not well liked in the tourism industry for quite a while. I actually did a speaking engagement for the tourism industry right after this. The equipment that they furnished did not work, so I could not present the slides. And then I got poo-pooed and booed and everything else because why ruin a good legend was the quote that was thrown at me. I said, well, if you were in her shoes, would you really like your life to be turned upside down for the rest of eternity and lies be told about you? I came up with that phrase, more victim than villainous. Now, actually a standard reading for tour guides, and they present both. When I even do it on tours, I say the legend of Lavinia Fisher, and I tell the legend. When I get to talking about historical fact, then I tell the facts of this tale. The legend's never going to go away. I had a reporter from the News and Courier contact me after my book came out, and he said, this woman's livid. She's saying that I was wrong about the 6 Mile Inn being burned to the house, burned to the ground, and she played it in the 1970s and on and on and on. And she says she was an avid reader of the Post and Courier, and she was going to cancel her subscription because of this nonsense. And I said, well, she apparently didn't get the 1819 copy where it said they burned the house to the ground, or she didn't get the 1970 copy where they said that 4 Mile House had been confused with 6 Mile House, and they destroyed it in the 1970s, so she played in the wrong house. So she's not as old as we think she was.
I know you do the ghost tours with Bulldog Tours. When can people catch you on these tours?
Bulldog Tours, and plugging our company here, this is the only company I know of that does this in Charleston. But when John Laverne created Bulldog Tours a little over 20 years ago, he decided to put his money where his mouth is. A portion of the sales of the tickets go to the places where we do the tours, like the Old City Jail, the Provost Dungeon, the Yorktown, Circular Congregational Graveyard. A little over 20 years, Bulldog Tours has put $5.5 million back in the preservation of Charleston, and that's nothing to sneeze at, and we're proud of that. Bulldog Tours is the only company I will work for because of that mentality. Now, as far as when I'll be over there, my schedule changes so much. If anybody is interested in me being at the jail, the best thing to do is to contact them and find out when they have me on the schedule for it, because I do all their nightly tours. I do a few history tours. Rarely they let me out in the daytime because I burst into flames. This is a special thing here that I'm out, and it's overcast, so that's why why I'm not sparking up right now, but
Oh, you
I
see how
do.
pale I am. Like,
I do most.
this
yeah.
is a rarity for me.
Well, I came out of the coffin to visit with you today, so I usually do all the nighttime ghost tours.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell either camera?
Yes, I will tell the camera that I am very much interested in seeing what this young lady comes up with. You see, when you do a criminal investigation, say you're working a murder, you stay focused on the murder. If you're working the murder and all of a sudden you find out they were involved with property crimes like burglaries, or they're involved with narcotics, okay, you hand the narcotics off to the drug investigators, you hand the property off to the property investigators so you can stay focused on what you did. When I did the Lavinia Fisher project, that's exactly what I did. I stayed focused. So some of the stuff that she's discovering, I didn't have time because it didn't meet my focus. Now, she's heading off into all these little tangents that I didn't get to explore. I'm just living vicariously through her now. So I'm hoping and waiting to see what grand stuff you come up with.
Well, thank you.
You've already found a couple of things that have intrigued me already, so kudos.
I'll be sure to keep you updated on anything else that I discover. All right, I think that's a wrap. Thank you so much.
Thank
again.
you. Now, off the record.
Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Bruce Orr of Lost in Legend. Check out last week's video where I toured the upper floors of the Old City Jail as a potential venue for the premiere production of my show. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll be notified of the next video, where we'll be going on a tour of the first floor, led by none other than Bruce here, complete with all the ghost stories therein.